Welcome, friends. Welcome back to The Broken Brain. This is our special history deep dive into the history of psychology and culture. And have we got a thing to talk about today? I'm really excited for this one. This is Thursday History, getting into history, like I said. And we're going to be talking about Dr. E. Kitch Childs. As you know, for this month, with Black History Month, I've been delving into some of the, let's just say, underreported, undertaught. Not that they were undertaught, but their stories were not taught. For those of us who've been through college and even maybe a graduate program in mental health counseling and psychology, to not have heard of some very, very foundational people. And today we're going to talk about Dr. Childs and how she was a great activist as well as a great psychologist. This is, of course, available to everybody out there in the whole world for the first bit of the program. And then the second half or last bit or third or 2/3 or 8/3, whatever it is. We're not here to do math, but the remainder will be available to those who are patrons of The Broken Brain over on Patreon. If you want to support The Broken Brain, you can go to patreon.com/brokenbrain and be aware that 50% of your donation will always go to the charity of focus within the month that you join the patron. This month, it is the Lavender Rights Project. If you go to lavenderrightsproject.org, you'll learn more about this wonderful organization that helps Black trans individuals who are going through practical struggles with housing, with legal issues, and just legal advocacy and finding those practical solutions for people who are going through that. That's lavenderrightsproject.org. And once again, any new members who join the Patreon this month, 50% of your donation will go to the Lavender Rights Project forever, for as long as you're giving it. So now let's dive in. This is a fascinating person that I was excited to read about, and so therefore also excited to tell you about as well. So E. Kitch Childs was a PhD in psychology and also an advocate for queer populations and for women's rights. She was born April 11th, 1937, was born as Ellen Childs, later on going by E. Kitch Childs, abbreviating her first name. She was born in Pittsburgh and lived from 1937, like I said, and she died in January 10th of 1993. She participated in what's known as the second wave of feminism, which is what they call the advocacy that happened through the 60s and the 70s, and became one of the founding members of the University of Chicago's gay liberation movement, and also the first African-American woman to earn her doctorate degree from the University of Chicago, specifically. Her degree was in human development. If we go in reverse order through her degrees, she got a Master of Science, also in human development, from the University of Chicago. But here's a really interesting thing. She got her Bachelor's of Science in chemistry from the University of Pittsburgh in her early teens. She was well known throughout her life just as a brilliant academic, as well as brilliant in the ways of social advocacy and working with people as well. She outlived all of the members of her immediate family, her family of origin, and two of her brothers were actually killed in racial violence. Now, as I've said, in fact, I think it was last week's history dive that we did, and you see this with a lot of people, and I'm seeing this with a lot of the early Black pioneers of psychology and psychiatry and advocacy, is that unfortunately many of them did not live to an old age. Dr. Childs lived to be only 55, but she accomplished a hell of a lot during that time. And so this goes back to this idea of, not only of what we can try to accomplish in our time, but also basically of investment of passion and investment of principles and beliefs. And also a look at, this is a rough life that many people have gone through, and I'm sure that contributes to that as well. So let's go back a bit. So after she finished her bachelor's degree as a teenager, she then went on to serve in the U.S. Navy and received accolades and things that basically was recognized for just exemplary service. Once again, everybody who worked with her, I'd keep reading quotes everywhere about people just commenting on her intellectual brilliance and also just a very passionate individual. After she had gotten out of the Navy, like I said, she went to earn her master's and her doctorate in human development. and became very involved in the feminist and LGBTQ movement for civil rights. As a lesbian herself, she was out the whole time that she was working. This was in the 60s and 70s. She went on to work in Oakland, California in private practice as a psychologist. And it was just really seemed to be just really tireless in bringing together racial, sexual orientation, and gender equality, working for that through civil rights. Like I said, she grew up in a heavily segregated area in Pittsburgh, and there was a lot of violence. Also, very, very close throughout her life with her oldest brother, Kenny Clark, who was, I guess, a well-known jazz drummer as well. So just like with last week, we're talking about there's a lot of mix in the early Black pioneers of psychology. Also had a lot of mix either on their own or family members or both in the arts as well. So you see how the arts and the sciences and the value of education was really something that carried on through this culture. And there's a lot of those things that we have to thank these pioneers today that we should be thanking them for. And with Dr. Childs, we're going to get to a very, very important thing that she did that is impacting the lives of every queer individual and everybody who comes into mental health treatment, especially if they are in the LGBTQ plus population. And so we're going to get into that. That's going to be a little bit later on. She herself she was a singer and a musician. And while she worked at the university, while she was still in Chicago, she was part of many different like music groups. The Philadelphia Symphony Orchestra she toured Europe. And she did folk singing within her advocacy as well. There were all-night concerts and things that lent themselves to that as well. There's a really interesting article at pressbooks.pub. It's called Kitch Child. Look up Kitch Child Pressbooks, and you'll find that. It's by Abigail Mayer, Bergen Stockton, and Jacob Cummings. If you're looking for that article, very, very interesting. Goes into some of those things. She lived in Paris, France for a while. She was in a relationship with a woman there, and found that to be a safer environment to be with her partner, which is much like James Baldwin. If you're familiar with James Baldwin and his work, he was a civil rights advocate. He was not publicly open, but as a gay man and a Black man, he did report that when he lived in Paris, that he went there as well, and that it was a center for the arts and for intellect and those kinds of things where he felt much safer. Let me back up. I didn't do. That is my understanding, is he was not publicly out. At least he did not speak about gay rights as much as he did about civil rights for Black Americans, but I didn't dive into that research. That's just my understanding about him. Getting back, though, to Dr. Childs, who was very much out. She unfortunately did run into a different type of treatment in France. She reported that many people resented her for being an American, and that was very, very hard, especially as her relationship kind of got on the rocks. She ended up returning eventually to the U.S. She lived in Amsterdam for a while with her brother, Kenny, the jazz musician I mentioned earlier. She was well known to be working on so many different projects and so much advocacy and getting involved with everything that she could, that she also was known to those who were near her to be lacking in self-care, that she poured all of her energy into doing things for helping people. She did openly talk about self-medication with marijuana. This was something that was not discussed as being very cool back then. We're talking reefer madness time or whatever, right? And it was around these times that this was also vilified by the U.S. government. So once again, a little bit of, you could say pioneering going on there, although a lot of people used marijuana in the 60s and 70s, not trying to say that that's unique, but the idea of self-medication. She played a lot of her own health issues very close to the chest, and the reason that she passed away at age 55 was due to a heart condition, to heart failure. Especially with female patients that she worked with, she brought an approach that was very client-centered. There was a whole shift through psychology over time. When you go back in time enough, it was with a lot of medical services. It was very much you visit the wise guru or whoever, and they would tell you what to do, kind of a thing. And you still see that sort of bleeding into lots of medical treatment nowadays as well. But as part of her advocacy, as well as what she felt was more ethical, client-centered treatment, she focused a lot on helping female patients to find empowerment and to stand up against some of the things that were obstacles to their success in society. And you got to remember that before a lot of the feminism, especially around this time, and the feminist advocacy, women were often not allowed to, like, say, take out a loan for a home or a car. They were not allowed to have a credit card when they started to be a thing. And in fact, they weren't allowed to choose to divorce. There was no fault divorce for a long time. We're looking into, right now we're looking at this time frame where there was a lot of fight to be able to grant a lot of rights for women that were being denied. And so Dr. Childs ran into rampant discrimination, because you think about it, she's a lesbian, she's Black, and she's a woman in this academic and medical field, particularly due to rampant sexism in psychology. And in that field, she helped to found the Association of Women in Psychology, which started in 1969. There's a great article about them at feministpsych.org, just called Association for Women in Psychology, that talks about their history. They have an annual conference as well that I was kind of scrolling through that's very, very interesting. That still is ongoing. So it's still an ongoing, very, very vibrant, active organization. So going from 1969, still going strong, and looking at interdisciplinary areas and fields and modalities within psychology to bring together the contributions of women to that field. Around the same time, in fact, exactly the same year as when the Chicago Gay Liberation Front was organized, which was a post-Stonewall activist group, is the origins there. It was initiated in the fall of 1969. And according to the what I was reading, in 1970, June 27th of 1970 to be precise, the very first Pride March was organized by the Gay Liberation Front. Somewhere around 150 people marched from Washington Square Park to the Civic Center, and this was a day before. Some similar events were also taking place in New York and Los Angeles. So in a lot of these metropolitan areas, you saw this start to go up, and she was, once again, a founding member of that organization. She picketed against problematic behaviors such as a discriminatory requirement of identification at polling locations that was directed only at Black individuals who would come to vote. You might see in the news where they're talking about requiring IDs again for voting. And once again, my understanding about that is not only was that a discrimination not only against Black Americans, but also it's a discrimination continues to be, if we find those laws. The reason that they talk about those being unconstitutional is they're also discrimination against those that are poor, those that are in a lower socioeconomic status. They may not have the funds to renew identification or to get identification. There's a sizable minority of Americans who do not have either access to that, or do they just either can't afford it, or maybe they don't drive if they live in certain areas where they just don't have to or can't afford the other costs that go along with driving. Nobody gives you a car when you get a driver's license. And maybe if they somehow didn't keep track of their birth certificate as a baby, right? Like if your parents don't give you one, you got to order one. That costs money. Anything that costs money in order to vote is considered a poll tax. That's the whole problem with that. And that is against the Constitution. So lots of things. I want everybody to think of this as a way to hold on to the passion that you have for things and say, how are you doing that? That might sound like a wrap-up, but it's only a wrap-up for the part of this that's available on the main feed. We're going to get into some very specific, interesting things for you patrons. So once again, everybody out there in general audience, thank you so much. Love y'all. And we'll be back with you all soon. So let's dive in now to just the stuff for you patrons.